everybody, this is Anne and welcome back to Painting Big. So today we are going to deal with pinning. Pinning is something that I think, although it's less important as we move away from metal miniatures, I feel like it still is useful and for a lot of different things. So we're going to cover that in today's video. All right, let's get to it. Alrighty, we're going to be working with this Darksword miniature, which is the Raven, Paladin of the Raven, as I recall. Let me get in focus. And we're going to be pinning her arm on. So with metal, you are often going to get things on sprues, sometimes even with plastic, and obviously with styrene. Now, the reason I say that pinning is like less important as we move away from metal is that metal is like that heavy, it's got, you know, a lot of weight to it. And when you've got these tiny connection points, that's where you're going to essentially get damage if you drop a model or fumble a model. You can get breakage a lot easier. And so pinning was always very useful. You can use your side cutters here, by the way, to clip these pieces off neatly. Put the flat part up against the model. Obviously this part is already broken off. I can go over here and get these flash snipped off. Probably need to take a knife and clean that up as well. And there we go, we've got it. So let's take, yeah, so as we move away from metal, obviously plastic models, they're less weighty, and so when they impact something like a floor or your painting desk from a small height, they're less likely to snap, right, along those connection points. But also glue, often, if you're working with styrene, the glue that you use tends to actually melt your parts together, which makes it a much stronger bond than using super glue with metal miniatures. Somebody asked me on my stream this morning about using two-part epoxy. I pointed out that not only are many people not really comfortable with using two-part epoxy, it tends to be very messy, and when you're trying to stick together tiny miniatures, unless you're very, very fastidious with it, you risk having globs of it essentially oozing out onto your miniature, which nobody likes. So this does have a connection point. You can see that. We've got a ball and socket here. This fits in pretty well here, but I can tell if I drop this model onto its front that this arm is probably not strong enough, right? It's probably going to snap right out. So how we would deal with that would be pinning. Now we got a couple of choices here. One of them is to cut off the ball of the ball and socket and to put a pin right in there. The other one is one that I sometimes do, which is to flatten down that ball, use it, so that we still get its strength, but create a section where I can easily sink a pin into that. So I'm going to use a flat file to flatten the top of the ball that goes into that socket. So first of all, once we have that, what do we need for pinning? We need a pin vise. Here, let's back up. Pin vise. This is probably the most standard design. It unscrews, and there's another chuck in there for holding various types of bits. I personally never bother with those. The end turns so that you can essentially put this into your hand and then turn it, and it sits against the palm of your hand. There are various ones. Some of them have big wooden balls on the end. If you have a bigger hand, that may be more comfortable for you. Look for one that is comfortable to hold. Here is the chuck that I'm using. Is just the one that comes to a point. Some people have asked me if that doesn't cause problems since I'm actually forcing that bit in there against these points. And I honestly, I've had this for a decade now, and I've never had a problem. So, but I do tend to keep like that one bit in there all the time. So the bit size that I'm using, and you can find these on places like Micromark and sometimes at railroading hobby stores and things like that. This is a tiny drill bit. It is a number 75. And the number 75 drill bit is 0.52 millimeters. So it's just a little tiny bit more than half of a millimeter wide. Then you need wire to go with this. And the wire that I'm using is just plain old beading wire, and it's a 24 gauge. 24 gauge is 0.51 millimeters in diameter. So essentially we've got a 0.52 millimeter bit and a 0.51 millimeter wire. Means pretty much perfect. Now, a lot of people will use paper clips or other things to pin with because they don't want to actually go out and buy wire or they want a thicker pin, and that's fair. When you are working with those paper clips, be very aware of what the metal is that you're working with. A lot of paper clips are spring steel. You don't want to use a hobby cutters to cut those. You need to use an actual wire cutter to cut that. If you forget this and you use a hobby cutter, your metal can shear, like your hobby cutter can actually shatter from trying to cut that spring steel, or it'll leave these big dents, big indentations in your hobby cutter. So you don't want that, especially not if you bought a really nice one to use on styrene for fine detail things. So please use the correct rated cutter. Hobby cutters are often rated just for things like brass, soft metals, whereas a real wire cutter will go through a spring steel paper clip. So that said, I personally have never found it necessary to use anything other than brass rod or brass wire in this case, as far as strength goes, because really what you're doing is you're just adding extra surface area to this ball and socket, right? You're making a long pin that will sink into a hole over here and will give you extra surface area and cling. So I guess I can say that I've never noticed a difference between using like a super strong wire, like a spring steel wire, and a regular old brass rod. So I tend to stick with the easy to use ones that won't damage my tools. And also brass rod and brass wire are really inexpensive, so I don't feel like I'm wasting money. I can also use those things as armatures for miniatures if I want to actually sculpt conversions onto models. So, but your mileage may vary. Go with your own gut as far as what you want to use. Just make sure to use the right rating clippers for it. So the last thing I want to say real quick, though, is that using this fine of a bit, though many people will think it's too fine, this does allow you to drill just about anything. Like the finest models at 28 millimeter, the tiniest parts you can usually still drill with this. So obviously if we just put this bit onto here and try to drill in, there's a chance it'll slip. So the first thing we do is we take a hobby knife and we put it right at the center-ish of our flattened area that we did. And then I'm going to press gently and twist it. Now essentially what I'm doing is I'm digging in a little hole that will serve as a place to set my bit. Let's get a little closer down here. So as I put my drill bit on that, it won't move, see? So that gives you a good start. Now if you don't concentrate on the angle that you're doing this, you can still get off center. So what I'll do then is I'll put it on the side so I can see that I'm drilling straight down into this ball. And there, see, it can still slip off. So that's why you have to kind of watch it, especially when I'm drilling it this close. If I really can't do it, if my bit keeps slipping, then I'm just going to cut off the ball and just go in with a wire. Yeah, see, it's so small. I'm just going really slow. And that's the advantage of this, of a hand drill. Now I'm seeing some threads of metal. That's good, that means it's drilling in. And as it drills in, I can get a little bit, I can move a little faster. So now we can see that hole in the center of that. I'm going to keep going in now that and I'm going to press a little bit more. I usually order these bits in like 10 at a time in a little box. They will get dull with use. So if you really are pressing and you just can't seem to see any threads coming out, then you might want to switch to a fresher bit if you've been using this one for a while. Drilling through this metal, it's mostly tin, so it's quite hard. It will wear down bits. Now I want to drill at least a couple millimeters down. And when you're using this small of a bit, do be gentle with it. You can press a little to make sure that it's digging in, but you don't want to drill too deep, and you don't want to push too hard because you can snap a bit. And if you snap a bit off in the hole, you're not getting it out. So I want to be gentle with it, and I'll periodically reverse my drill to kind of pull it out and pull these threads of metal out of there to clear my drill site. And after I've done maybe one more, be careful too as you're drilling, because if I lose track of how deep I've gone, I could drill through the miniature into my finger. This obviously, this happens to almost everybody when they're using the pin vise. Eventually, you'll be drilling something really skinny. This one is a little bit better because it's, as you can see, it's going down almost, it's not going to come out over here, right? It's actually drilling into a fatter part of the arm. So after I've got a bit of this, oh, now my drill is catching a little bit, so I gently wiggle it back and forth until I can pull it out. That's because that thread of metal was in there. So I want to do it a couple more times, make sure I've cleared this out. I've got a couple millimeters depth now, so I'm going to try to make sure I've got everything out of that hole. I'm going to stick that drill bit in and try to clear it. Okay, now we're going to take a little bit of wire and we're going to do a test fit. I don't need very much wire at all, but I usually do clip off more than I need just so I can keep track of it. Since this whole spool maybe cost me like $2.50, I'm like pretty cavalier with how much I use it, or waste, I guess, at a time. So I'm going to bring this up and I'm going to stick it in there, and there it goes. And now I can tap on it to see how solid it is. It wiggles a little, but a little wiggle room is okay. And the reason for that is that when you drill your other hole, even if you don't get a perfect alignment, having this wiggle room means that you probably can still make it fit flush. So having the drill hole be just a little bit wider than the wire is not a bad thing. You don't want it so wide, so much different that the wire will just fall out, which is why this is how I'm playing with it to make sure that that has a good grip. But it will help us when we go to figure out how this fit is going to happen. So this is very good, and I'm going to glue it. Normally I would use Zap-A-Gap, which is a CA Plus formula, which is a more of a liquid super glue, but all I've got right now is a gel. So gel's not ideal for this sort of thing. Not only is it hard to stuff it in the hole, but it's just not as strong with a shearing motion as a more gap filler super glue. So I'm going to just squeeze gently. This is Loctite. So I get a little dab there. Grab my wire and stuff it in there. And then we'll let that set. And we'll trim it down a bit. We'll need to trim this again. There. Okay, so we've got that bit. We can kind of look at it, and this is where you want to remember how your sword goes, how it fits, right? Remember this fit right as it was she's holding it out and down, right? So my socket really was meant to go in like this. And we can kind of see it and line it up, right? So you can kind of see that. Now there's two ways to do this. Sometimes if it's dull metal in there, I'll actually just be able to press this bit in, the wire. I can just press it into the area and it will go. It'll make kind of a shiny little line or a shiny little dot that lets me guide where I'm going. Here though, I'm going to use something else. I'm going to use some red paint. And a lot of people do it this way. I'll just put a little bit of this fire red on top of this bottle. A little more than I wanted. That always is the case, isn't it? And then the trick here is to dip just the end in. Bring it over. And then line it up. So I'm looking at it. I'm going to come in at this. And I'm going to push it into that. And then I've got my dot. So that actually is higher than I thought, but I need it. I think it'll work. I'm going to actually, yeah, I think so. I think it actually is that. Because the shoulder, like, there isn't much room. The shoulder socket's right in there. So I think that is correct. Yeah, so having the red dot, that tells me where I want to drill. So right again, what am I going to do? I'm going to grab my knife. Get at the right area, and twist it, just like I did before. Kind of get my hand back here, twist, twist, twist. Going to make that red dot into a point that I can sink my pin vise onto and catch. And then I'm going to drill straight in. Oh. Again, things want to track a little bit. Sometimes you have to start at a little bit of an angle. When it wants to track down the socket, I'll start up here so that I'm coming at it more straight until I can get a proper divot in there. Then once I have that divot, then I can even out and go out here and it won't skate anymore. So you essentially drill just a little bit at a weird angle to make sure you've got a proper divot to set the drill bit. And we're going to drill a little bit in here, and then we're going to pull it out and we're going to check. We're going to check to make sure that this is lining up okay. Because at this point, you could still shift a little bit and start a new hole. So right now, I think actually that looks good. Like it looks like it's going to slot in about where I want it. I can feel the hole here. So I'm going to keep going. And here, of course, there's no risk in drilling through because we've got this big heavy metal body here. So no problem here. You can see those threads of metal start coming out. That's what we want. Remember that we actually are going to still trim this wire. This wire, if I'm drilling into a softer substance, like if I'm pinning something in a plastic model or a resin model, this length of wire would be just fine. But in metal, it would take us a long time to try to drill a hole that deep, and we'd risk a higher, the deeper you go and the more metal around your drill bit, the higher risk you're going to snap it off. So we really want to drill the minimum we can, and usually for me, that's a little less than that wire. I'm going to just try to get a little bit more here. And then I'm going to grab my sword again. And this time, I'm getting more of a feel for that socket. In fact, it can even sit there. Like you can still see there's a lot of room, right? So I know that I want to, the fact that it's holding means that's good. I've got some surface there that my pin can hold on to. I want a little more though. So I want to go a little bit deeper. Again, gentle pressure, slow motion. And if you've been using your pin vise bit for a while and you really are not seeing any progress, you might need to switch out to a fresh bit. This one is fairly fresh, so I just need to be patient. There's some threads coming out. There we go. Yeah, I think I've got a good depth there. I'm going to try it again. You can see all these little threads like littering my area down here. Oh, there. Look at that. There it goes. And looks like a perfect fit. So that red paint dot really worked for us. And you can see how it's nice and snug. It holds itself in a socket. Now when I put glue in there, it's gonna act as a strengthener, right? It's going to give us extra surface area to hold that arm on in case we drop it. So in that case, the sword might bend, the wrist might bend, but at least the arm isn't going to break off and we can rebend that metal. So, that said, one thing before I pin this in place is I need to look around. And before I attach pieces on a model when it's in multi-parts, I will stop and ask myself, does this get in the way of me painting anything else? So in this case, I can still reach up underneath the arm here. I can still paint the underside of the arm. I can still, it's not blocking the hair. I can still paint the cape here. I can still get at her neck. It's really not in the way of anything. Like the sword out here will get a little bit in the way when we're trying to paint this stuff, but not really. So since it's not really impeding our brush, we can attach it before we prime and we can paint this model all as one piece. If it was something like a dragon with a wing that curved around and really made it hard for me to like paint parts of it, or just that it was really big and cumbersome to hold, then I would hold off attaching the pieces. I would paint them separately and then I would put them on. Maybe I'll do a separate video where I talk about that and show a couple of examples to you guys. But anyway, that is our pinning. So our last step is just to glue that arm together, prime the model, and go. If when you've put the piece on, you might notice a gap, or something like that. If it's a really fine seam like this, the cleverest models will take care of this by putting the seam in a place where the clothing would naturally have a seam. So in her case, it's her vest versus like that arm guard, right? But technically, this shirt probably connects to the shirt there, right? So you can use putties of various types to fill in that tiny gap under the arm. You could also just fill it with like a very thick gloss medium or sealer. It's small enough that you probably could build up a few layers of that. That's kind of an easy, if you have time, that can be an easy one if you don't know how to deal with putty. Although I did just show you how to do some sculpting with green stuff. So this would take a tiny little bit of green stuff and it probably would be really easy. You just like stuff it in there, let it dry, and you wouldn't even really need to blend it in because there's lots of creases and stuff down there. So even a really just quick stuff it with the end of your clay shaper would work pretty well. And that's probably what I'll do if I paint this model. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in. Remember, I do have a Patreon, as you see on the screen. And on that Patreon, at the $2 level, we do at least one companion PDF every month for things on this YouTube. In addition, if you just sign on to my Patreon as a free patron, you'll know when I put all of these fundamental videos up on the YouTube, and you'll get early access to watch them before anybody else. All right, thanks so much. I hope this was instructive. I hope that you'll get inspired for attaching. I will say this is kind of addictive. When I first learned to pin, I started pinning everything. And I'm not the only one. So it can be addictive, but I hope you find it useful. Okay, everybody? Have a great one, and I will be back at you. I think our next and hopefully final Fundamentals of Miniature Painting video will be priming. After that, I'm going to be going into Fundamentals of Miniature Painting in practice. That new series is going to cover very specific things like painting faces and painting buckles and painting leather and all this kind of stuff, all right? So look forward to that, and I will see you next time. This is Anne signing off.